Ah, yes. Okay. So we read last fortnight about Ashupati's identification with the supreme consciousness, and the path he has followed is the path of the yoga of the king. That is what is known traditionally as the Raj Yoga. Now, in this canto and the other two cantos that follow, what we have is the stages of the ascent, the steps of the ascent, the major experiences and realizations that follow one after another. But what we don't have here is the process. Process in the sense that we don't have here how exactly, if someone has to do this yoga, how the person would do it. And there's a good reason for that, because elsewhere in one of Sri Aurobindo's early writings, he mentions that these yoga, the different systems of yoga form a gradation. So Hatha Yoga and Pranayama are meant mainly for the man who has what is called as Deh Atma Bodh, who is identified with his physical self. And Raj Yoga is meant for man who is more identified with his mental and psychical self. Whereas a still higher yoga, Adhyatma Yoga, which is yet to be given to man, is for man who has ascended into his spiritual self and seeks to identify with the highest, what he calls as Parameshwara and Shakti. So essentially, he says that Raj Yoga is meant for the age of Kali, in which mankind has been going through, and Sri Aurobindo had to tread all the paths and recover the lost yoga. And this is like a recovery of the lost yoga, which he recovers for mankind. But this is not an easy yoga, as we can see from the kind of experiences and the giant leaps from one step to another. Itself is through a kind of unbridgeable abyss. And the yoga which has to be undertaken, the same experiences and the working of the new consciousness has to be undertaken now through another route, and that we find in the book of yoga, where the mother reveals the yoga for man. Whereas here we find Ashupati's discovery. He rediscovers all that has been gained in the traditional paths, especially using the Rajyogic method of withdrawal of the consciousness from the outer fields. Ashupati enters into the inner fields, and he experiences all the possibilities of the inner subliminal consciousness, the ability to put oneself into other beings and forces, the purer perception, the keenness of the mind, the heightening of all the powers and faculties, the awakening of the occult and hidden worlds. We read those beautiful lines: the inner worlds swung open their crystal doors. So he could enter into these inner worlds and travel at will, and withdrawing himself further from these inner worlds, which form a hierarchical arrangement, Ashupati enters into the very highest states, into those states where there is silence and the absolute. And we'll read these last few lines: where judgment ceases and the word is mute. This is just on page 38. On page 38, no, on page 33. On page 33, we had read last time: through a last glimmer and drift of vanishing stars, the superconscient realms of motionless peace, where judgment ceases and the word is mute, and the unconceived lies pathless and alone. There came not form or any mounting voice, there only were silence and the absolute. So this is the yoga of the king, this is the inner freedom, and this is the identification, or rather an experience that Ashupati has in a lucent moment, in one of those moments of what is called in traditional yogas as trance and samadhi. And as he returns back from that, there is a stillness, and in that stillness new truths begin to emerge forms begin to appear, new significance begin to take hold of his mind, and his mind changes. There is a first change, first psycho-spiritual change, where his mind changes into a seeing thought, what is called in the yogic parlance as pashyanti vak, the thought which sees, and a self-revealing voice. He knew the source from which his spirit came. Since he is now identified, he has experienced that ultimate origin and source of all things. Movement was married to the immobile vast. He plunged his roots into the infinite. He based his life upon eternity. So this is the limit to which the old yogas could reach, and Ashupati has discovered that though a finite being in surface, this finite being extends into the infinite, and each part finds its fulfillment in the absolute. But then there comes the difficulty of the earthly life, since we are not just souls that can withdraw from the outer and the inner fields, but also embodied beings. We are also a body, a mind, and life. So after a while, one is drawn back and pulled back from the inner states and comes back into the outer fields. And this is the description we find here. Only a while at first these heavenlier states, these large, wide poised upliftings could endure. The high and luminous tension breaks too soon. So it's not possible for man, as he is today in his present constitution, to live all the time in these high states. There is a pulling back, a calling back, a coming down, as it were, from the high stairs to which he has climbed. And now Sri Aurobindo reveals to us the reasons why this is not possible in the present state, of course. The body's stone stillness and the life's hushed trance, the breathless might and calm of silent mind. So the yogin who has perfected his seat, the asana, the body's stone stillness, and he who has perfected his breath of life, mastered it through what is called in the language of yoga as kumbhak, where the breath can cease and yet death breaks not in. And Sri Aurobindo had this experience many a times. And this calm and still mind, even that cannot be sustained for a long time, and this luminous tension breaks and one returns back, or slowly they fail as sets a golden day. So either there is a sudden and abrupt descent and coming down, or coming back, or coming out, or there is a slow fading of the inner state. The restless nether members tire of peace. This line, like many of Sri Aurobindo's lines, has a touch of gentle irony in it, that we are tired even of peace and joy, and we seek restlessness. There are parts in us. Of course, when one leads an ordinary life, these parts govern us completely and we are under their siege. But even when one has taken to the life of yoga, these restless nether members, they keep on nudging, and a time comes when they slowly pull the consciousness down and out. A nostalgia of old little works and joys, a need to call back small familiar selves, to tread the accustomed and inferior way, the need to rest in a natural poise of fall. Much later, Sri Aurobindo would reveal to us, through the words of the Divine Himself, when the mother, that is Savitri, asks the boon for earth, she is told, heaven's call is rare, rarer the heart that heeds. And then he reveals that what happens to man only in an hour of uplifting stress. Men answer to the call of greater things, or lifted by some strong hand to breathe heaven air, they slide back to the mud from which they climbed, and feel a joy in safe return to a friendly base. Though something in them weeps for glory lost and greatness murdered, yet they rejoice in their fall. So this is the state of affairs, because the human consciousness is double, and we have within us contradicting elements, and this is the great task of yoga, to harmonize all these contradicting elements around this central discovery, the discovery of the divine within us. As a child who learns to walk can walk not long, replace the Titan will forever to climb. On the heart's altar dim the sacred fire. So slowly we get tired, we get restless, we are unable to climb or aspire for long, and the inner light fades and we are back to our old familiar self. An old pull of subconscious chords renews. It draws the unwilling spirit from the heights, or a dull gravitation drags us down to the blind driven inertia of our base. So either it is the restless mind or the vital, if nothing else, just the body whose roots are plunged into the subconscious, and its inertia, it draws the spirit down from the heights. But there is no cause for despair, no cause to feel sorry, because this too the divine diplomat can use. He makes our fall a means for greater rise. So this is an interesting part. We see in the symbol of the Tao, there is a wholeness created by there are two fishes, and one is dark and one is bright, and one has discovered both aspects of the reality. In Aurobindo yoga, of course, we go one step further, and this dark half of things has to be transformed into the bright and luminous sphere in terms of the bright. But here slowly Ashupati has to rediscover the totality, the total consciousness, the integral consciousness. So this too the supreme diplomat can use. He makes our fall a means for greater rise. For into the ignorant nature's gusty field, into the half-ordered chaos of mortal life, the formless power, the self of eternal light, follow in the shadow of the Spirit's descent. So Mother says in one of her passages, where she was asked what does it mean when she says, I am with you. She says, my child, when you sink or fall down, I don't stand on the shore and watch. I go down with you. I sink with you. So the divine comes down once one has touched the core, and even otherwise, this is the inner work of the avatar. If we really go down into its depths, behind depths, we shall discover that it is the divine who has plunged himself into this darkness of the world, so that this too can be transformed into light. And the same process is repeated in the transformation of the whole being into a new consciousness. So we discover the brighter and beautiful parts, and the light comes first in these parts. There is very little resistance, but having done that work, our gaze, our consciousness is turned again and again to those parts which are little more difficult, and then little more difficult, till finally we have to touch the bedrock of the hard rock-like inconscience within our nature. Because though our mind tries to cut this reality into two, one which is the black half and the other that which is the white, but essentially they are one, and what we call as the dark half is nothing but light concealed. The twin duality, forever one, chooses its home mid the tumults of the sense. He comes unseen into our darker parts, and curtained by the darkness does his work. This is what we have to remember. A subtle and all-knowing guest and guide, till they too feel the need and will to change. So this is the process of yoga, of transformation, that one is not allowed to dwell permanently on these heights. In old yogas, one withdraw the consciousness more and more, and even when one came down just a notch below, just to keep a kind of a little veil, so that one can remain in contact with the world. and help the toiling world, and then when that work is over, one tore the veil away which one had put between oneself and the Supreme, and one entered and merged and vanished. But here one descends into the dark fields, into the darkness. The one who is within us, he descends. It's not that we can descend, we fall, but he descends and comes with us, and there curtained he does the work. At one place, the mother says, "My child, I never abandon anyone. Even those who have revolted and gone away, I keep myself fully informed of them." And then she says something extremely touching. "In fact, I never forget and hold myself responsible for someone whom I have met or seen even for a moment in his life." So this is the play of the Divine Mother, this is the compassion and the grace, that no one is abandoned. There is a story of Dilip Kumar Roy. As we know, he could never accept the mother, and he used to actually remain divided between wonder and revolt. And then finally, after Sri Aurobindo's leaving the body, he left the ashram. For many years, for almost a decade, the mother kept his room. And when she was asked why doesn't she give it to someone else, she said, "My child, but every night his soul comes here to rest in this atmosphere." So this is the difference between our inner and our outer being, and the Divine knows it all. So wherever we go and wherever we are, in whatsoever state, she is with us, and this is the faith and this is the hope we must keep, because this is the inner fact of our inner life. And this is done so that these parts also feel compelled to change. Each part must, here there is another interesting thought, that each part must feel the need to change in its own freedom. This is the great difficulty of transformation. It is not enough that the mind impresses itself upon the vital, the lower vital, and the body, which of course it needs to do in the early stages, but eventually it is this mental control is lost, and these parts must themselves will to change, and the Divine compels them to change by constantly putting a subtle and then an intense pressure on them. All here must learn to obey a higher law. Our body cells must hold the immortal's flame, else would the spirit reach alone its source, leaving a half-saved world to its dubious fate. Nature would ever labor unredeemed, our earth would ever spin unhelped in space, and this immense creation's purpose fail, till at last the frustrate universe sank undone. So this in fact is a kind of heightening and fulfillment of the grand thought in the Ish Upanishad. Sri Aurobindo speaks of this Upanishad as the base of the divine life, and in the Ish Upanishad we have these few thoughts, few shlokas which in a very beautiful way reveal this, that into a darkness they dwell who live in this world of multiplicity and ignorance, but they enter into a greater darkness, into a greater blindness, who enter into the light alone, into the oneness alone. So essentially the yoga is not complete if one leaves the dark half and enters into the bright sphere of reality, as has been done in more recent times. The understanding of yoga is like that, but not for the Vedic rishis. So here, as one rises, one achieves a new poise of consciousness, and then that poise has to be stabilized and integrated with the rest of our being. And the process to do it is that each time we gain a new poise and a higher poise, all other parts have to learn to obey the higher law. Even his godlike strength to rise must fall. So, because Ashwapati has come for the yoga of transformation, Ashwapati, that is Sri Aurobindo, so even he must go through this whole process, because essentially the process is the same. We read when Mother speaks of the transformation yoga of the cells in the agenda. She says, "My child, The mind has been sent away, the vital has been sent away. They were already transformed, so they have been set aside, and the work is going on in the body. The body must rediscover all the high experiences which she had in the inner consciousness, which she had in the inmost depths. They must be rediscovered by the very body cells. And we read that line above, that the very our body cells must hold the immortal's flame. His God greater consciousness withdrew behind, dim and eclipsed, his human outside strove to find again the old sublimities, bring the high saving touch, the ethereal flame, call back to its dire need the divine force. So this is the inner unseen work of the avatar, and this is the inner unseen work of the yogic change which goes on behind the veil. One sees only the surface, but this is the inner struggle, the battle, the conflict, and the victory. But there is always hope, because always the power poured back like sudden rain. So each time we go a little higher, and each time we dip a little lower, a little less resistance, there is a little less resistance, and there is a greater opening, and there is a greater possibility, because there is a wider base. Always the power poured back like sudden rain, or slowly in his breast a presence grew. It clambered back to some remembered height, or soared above the peak from which it fell. Each time he rose, there was a larger poise, a dwelling on the higher spirit's plane. The light remained in him a longer space. Aurobindo speaks of how this opening comes. He says at first the spiritual consciousness comes in a trickle, then it comes in a thin stream, and then it comes like a rain, and then in torrents and floods. So this is the process of the change, that each time we rise a little higher, and the light remains a little longer, and the presence grows and grows till a time comes when nothing can veil it. Each time he rose, there was a larger poise, a dwelling on a higher spirit's plane. The light remained in him a longer space. In this oscillation between earth and heaven, in this ineffable communion's climb, there grew in him, as grows a waxing moon, the glory of the integer of his soul. A union of the real with the unique, a gaze of the alone from every face. So slowly, as each part that is unique in us identifies with the real, the reality behind it, the reality that it represents or shadows, we grow into the integer of the soul. And this is how the integral yoga proceeds. A union of the real with the unique, a gaze of the alone from every face, the presence of the eternal in the hours, widening the mortal mind's half look on things. So initially we even when we enter into the spiritual realms and we gain knowledge of the higher worlds, we yet do not know or do not have the knowledge of the ways of the world and how the play of forces works here. But as one descends after that light, carrying that light within and with that presence, then one begins to understand this play better and better. So we have a widening the mortal mind's half look of on things, bridging the gap between man's force and fate. For what exactly is fate? Fate is nothing but a complex play of forces of this world wide web. And of course the word is used as if it's something unknown or ill understood, but actually it is because we do not understand the complex play of forces. So as Ashupati grows, as the consciousness grows, it begins to bridge the gap between man's force and fate, because it begins to understand the complex play of forces and master it. Made whole, the fragment being, we are here. At last was won a firm spiritual poise, a constant lodging in the eternal's realm, a safety in the silence and the ray, a settlement in the immutable. It's such a beautiful line that where is the safety? We look for safety all across the globe, but the true safety lies in the stillness of the Absolute, in the deathless ray, in the eternal's breast. So initially, this is with great difficulty, after much groping, only for a few moments we can hold this deeper consciousness or stay in it. But slowly, as the resistance and the inertia of our base becomes thinner and thinner, it melts through the constant contact with the light. There is a constant lodging in the eternal's realm. His heights of being lived in the still self. His mind could rest on a supernal ground and look down on the magic and the play, where the God-child lies on the lap of night and dawn, and the everlasting puts on time's disguise. So through this process one begins to see that how, as the Vedic seer said, that the divine child is the divine child suckles through the night and the dawn, both the bright mother and the dark mother, and grows in consciousness. So we have the psychic being. Why does it choose to be in the lap of night and go through this night? One begins to understand that how the psychic being grows and its full journey through the dark and difficult passages and through the bright and luminous one, how everything has contributed to the growth, each and every experience, and the everlasting puts on time's disguise. So one discovers what is the true sense, why the Eternal has disguised himself in this slow unfolding process of time. We have a very beautiful remark of the mother about some lines on this passage. The mother says, "This is the great difficulty in the physical life. It is the strength of the old habit that pulls down the body to its old way. There comes the struggle, and if the faith is sufficient, then comes the struggle, and if the faith is sufficient, if the ardor for progress is there, then out of this fall we can rise to a higher receptivity and a better achievement." So the struggle and the conflict are there, the battle is there, and it is fought within. Another place Aurobindo writes in Savitri, this is the inner war man cannot escape. Man must overcome or miss his higher fate. This is the inner war without escape. So we have to go through this process of inner war, and if our faith is sufficient, then we go through everything. And if we really wish to progress, then during these moments of clouding and shielding, these moments when doubt and despair and revolt come up, we know through the eye of faith that only a cloud has come over our soul. The sun cannot be extinguished. The glory we have felt and seen even for a while, the flame of aspiration that has been lit in us can never be clouded, can never be extinguished. It may be clouded for a while, just as a cloud comes before the sun. So if we keep the ardor of progress, the will for progress, to go through that struggle which is indispensable, and if we have the faith, then out of this fall we rise to an even greater receptivity and a better achievement. And then the mother says, in fact, there is nothing in this experimental life that is not meant to push the whole creation towards the luminous, marvelous divine end that is promised to our effort and to our faith. So this is the second part we just read, that the divine child grows through the night and the dawn. So everything helps the creation to move towards the luminous, marvelous, divine end. Such is the nature of this life, such is fate, such is destiny. Elsewhere in Savitri, Ashwapati says, our destiny is written in double terms. Whether it seem good or evil to men's eyes, it is always for good that the eternal works. So we move through joy and we move through grief, we move through good and we move through evil. So she says, never despair, never lose courage, never lose faith. The grace is there and marvelously uses everything to reach as quickly as possible the goal that is promised to our effort. If we can enlarge our consciousness sufficiently, we see that even the apparent defeats are marvelous steps towards the final victory. So eventually and essentially, there is nothing like a failure. What we call as failure, what we call as fall, is just another line of work. It is working in another field of consciousness. And that is how one begins to look as one's mind rests on a supernal ground and as our heights of being begin to live in the still self. And then what happens is something very, very interesting. The true sense of equanimity, the deeper spiritual equanimity, not what passes off by that name, inertia, indifference, stoicism, or a philosophical disenchantment, or even detachment, but something else. It is the discovery, the luminous discovering of the divines working in this cosmos, not only in things that seem wonderful to our eyes, but even things that seem dark and ugly. To the still heights and to the troubled depths, His equal spirit gave its vast ascent, a poised serenity of tranquil strength, a wide, unshaken look on time's unrest, faced all experience with unaltered peace. This facing of all experience is because of a new knowledge that has arisen inside Ashwapati. He is able to see and see it with a tranquil strength without being shaken within all the flow and flux of time's unrest, and therefore he discovers the unaltered peace behind all experience. The mother speaks of it in one of her prayers that on the surface is the storm, but below are luminous, vast expanses of peace. Indifferent to the sorrow and delight, untempted by the marvel and the call, immobile it beheld the flux of things. So even the temptation to escape, the last temptation that one has to be free of is the temptation for moksha, the temptation for nirvana, the temptation for solitary escape from a struggling world. Then one discovers the true equanimity which stands behind the flux of things and helps it to change, compels it to change by that stillness, calm and apart, supported all that is. His spirit's stillness held the toiling world, inspired by silence and the closed eye's sight. His force could work with a new luminous art on the crude material from which all is made, and the refusal of inertia's mass and the grey front of the world's ignorance and nascent matter and the huge error of life. So this is how one works inwardly, not through all the outer running, but it's a silent inner work done in the still depths, done by the power of stillness within us, the power of the silent self. As a sculptor chisels a deity out of stone, he slowly chipped off the dark envelope. line of defense of nature's ignorance, the illusion and mystery of the inconscient, in whose black pall the eternal wraps his head, that he may act unknown in cosmic time. So this thought will come again and again when eventually when death is transfigured and the mask of death is ripped apart, and one discovered that in the cowl of death, in the disguise of death, there was none else but the one who loves this world. And in the very first canto of this book, book 1, we read that passage, and darkness slipped like a failing cloak from the reclining body of a god. So here, through this process, the darkness is chipped off, and slowly the goddess or the god who is concealed behind the defense of nature's ignorance, nature hides the divine within it. In each and every movement of nature, however ignorant it may seem, there is the divine hidden inside, and it is its task and the task of the human soul to reveal it or to unveil it, and that process is described here. But for that we must be free of the surface illusion and appearances, the illusion and mystery of the inconscient, in whose black pall the eternal wraps his head, that he may act unknown in cosmic time. A splendor of self-creation from the peaks, a transfiguration in the mystic depths, a happier cosmic working could begin and fashion the world's shape in him anew. God found in nature, nature fulfilled in God. So this is how the chain proceeds. That means the yogin practicing the yoga of transformation also goes through all that anyone else goes through in the ordinary life. But the difference is that he goes through it consciously, conscious of the divine within, conscious of the working, conscious of the play of forces, conscious of the divine destiny. And therefore, even while he gives his equal assent, he does it with delight and collaborates in the process. Already in him was seen that task of power. Life made its home on the high tops of self. His life began to draw sustenance from the heights. The mother speaks of four ways through which the life draws its energy. One is, of course, from the inconscient and through food, and another is through the universal life that is around it, and the fourth, which is the best, is from the spirit's heights through the power of aspiration. As we climb, life begins to draw its sustenance from there. So here Ashupati's, this process is being described through Ashupati's yoga. His soul, mind, heart became a single sun. Only life's lower reaches remained dim, but there too, in the uncertain shadow of life, there was a labor and a fiery breath. The ambiguous, cowled, celestial puissant word, vast by the inner witness, moveless peace. Even in the struggling nature left below, strong periods of illumination came. Lightnings of glory after glory burned. Experience was a tale of blaze and fire. So slowly, even in these darker chambers, first it is the mind and the heart and the higher parts of life that gain a new poise, but the lower reaches, the lower vital and its propensities, the body, the subconscious parts remain still dim. But even there, a pressure and a working and a fiery breath begins to be felt till they too change. Air rippled round the argosies of the gods. Strange riches sailed to him from the unseen. Splendors of insight filled the blank of thought. Knowledge spoke to the inconscient stillnesses. Rivers pour down of bliss and luminous force, visits of beauty, storms, sweeps of delight, rain from the all powerful mystery above. So, this is the process of the change, and we read this in the Epiphany, Vedic Epiphany, these rains of the rivers, the streaming down of the rivers of knowledge, of bliss, coming down from the heights into the human abyss. We will take a pause here. We will reread these last few lines because it starts a new movement in Ashupati's Yoga next week.